Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our headquarters at the Brazilian Center for International Relations, CEBRI. I'm Teresa Rossi. I'm a Deputy Director for Partnerships and International Cooperation here at CEBRI, and I have the pleasure of moderating this event entitled Bridging Continents, a Dialogue on Climate Leadership from Baku to Belém. On behalf of CEBRI, I would like to thank the Embassy of Azerbaijan in Brazil for the partnership in this important discussion, and to thank the presence of the ambassador, Rashad, who fortunately was able to join us in person. I would also like to thank Instituto Clima e Sociedade in the figure of its executive director, Maria Neto. She would be joining us today and was unfortunately unable to arrive because of the event at the Museum of Tomorrow. But Instituto Clima e Sociedade is a fundamental partner of CEBRI's in the strengthening of our climate change and environment program, led by former Minister Isabella Teixeira. CEBRI was founded over 25 years ago, but is currently going through a very fruitful period of expansion. This growth requires restructuring our priorities, team, and lines of action. Since the creation of the Climate Change and Environment Program by Minister Isabella in 2017, this agenda is growing in importance within the institution. As Isabella always mentions, in no other topic does Brazil have so much soft power and international relevance. Brazil is witnessing a unique window of opportunity to set the international agenda with the presidency of G20 this year and of BRICS Plus and COP30 next year. CEBRI is deeply involved in the G20 through the coordination of Think20, the engagement groups that unites think tanks to present policy recommendations for the G20. Within the discussions of the T20, strategies to leverage climate action and promote just energy transitions were a fundamental component. With the support of Instituto Clima e Sociedade, CEBRI is working on the roadmap that connects these discussions within the G20 to the agenda for COP30 next year, harnessing our capacity to work collaboratively with other think tanks worldwide, which is part of our institutional DNA. COP29 is a very important milestone in this roadmap, which is why we are very pleased to strengthen ties with our colleagues from Azerbaijan and to be hosting this event. Without further ado, I will introduce our panelists so that we can begin the discussions with Isabella Teixeira's opening remarks. Isabella Teixeira is the trustee emeritus. Isabella, or Bella, is trustee emeritus here at CEBRI and the former Environment Minister of Brazil. She is also co-chair of the International Resource Panel of the United Nations Environment Program, member of the High-Level Advisory Board of UNDESA, and of the Administrative Council of the Brazilian Development Bank. She played a key role in the negotiation of the Paris Agreement and was appointed in 2012 to serve on the high-level panel of eminent persons post-2015 Develop Agenda. In 2013, she won the UN Champions of the Earth Award for her contribution to reducing deforestation in the Amazon. Yalchin Rafiev is the lead negotiator for COP29 Azerbaijan. Mr. Rafiev serves as Deputy Foreign Minister and has worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for almost 2 decades. He has served in multiple roles to advance multilateral diplomacy, including as 3rd and 2nd Secretary at the Permanent Mission of Azerbaijan in the UN office in Vienna, and as 1st Secretary at the Permanent Mission of Azerbaijan in the UN office in Geneva. In his role as lead negotiator, Mr. Rafiev will have the challenge of working with 198 parties to the UNFCCC to build consensus and refine potential leading roles for the negotiations based on a shared vision of success. And finally, since we don't have Maria Neto, unfortunately, here with us, I will introduce Túlio. Túlio is a career diplomat, Túlio Andrade, the head for climate negotiations at Brazil's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He served as climate negotiator from 2010 to 2018 and had postings in London and Tokyo. Graduated in law, he holds a master's degree from the Harvard Kennedy School and a research degree from the Tokyo University of Arts. Thank you for the presence of you all. We can begin the discussion with Minister Isabella's opening remarks about the geopolitical context behind the climate negotiations.
Okay. It's okay? Yes. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Teresa, for the opening remarks and also amazing words. Welcome our people and myself. Dear Minister, I was Vice Minister in the past. Okay, so after this I became Minister. I can tell you that you will be a Minister, okay? After the COP. I hope so. But welcome, my dear Ambassador. Okay, thank you very much for coming, for joining us here in Rio de Janeiro. And I'm very happy to have other friends here from Itamaraty and from Ministry of Environment. Okay, Túlio, my close friend, is not a diplomat, it's a really important friend, one of the key person for the Paris Agreement negotiations. Thank you very much for joining us. I met Ambassador Correia do Lago earlier. He was there in Museum of Tomorrow. And unfortunately, Maria Neto cannot join us, but I'd like to invite, come on here, Emmanuel. Okay, sit here in front of us. Emmanuel is from France. He's been working also together with X and with myself, and together probably he can share. And with Madame Laurence Toubiana, we're working together in international partnership to try to figure out better what civil society wants from COP30 and also the global civil society from COP29. So I think that if you can please share some thoughts when I invite you to join us exactly to make clear how the international community, civil society is coming or will come to Baku plus Belém. And I think that is really a huge opportunity for both of you. But the ambassador lives in Brazil, is close to be Braziliense, okay? But I know that your first time in my country, so be welcome. Don't forget to drink caipirinha, to relax. And after this, probably you will succeed in the negotiations in Baku. I will be there. I think part of people here will be there, okay? And I'm confident that we will be closer to your government, personally to your leadership, and also the chair of the COP to be so successful and also to come together with us, because if you be well successful, I'm sure that COP30 will have really innovative agenda and you manage better the political context of the climate negotiations that we need to come and to understand what is happening today in the world. And this is why I don't know if I will have time to discuss geopolitics, but I think that is very interesting to observe 2 or 3 things. That is the international context and how climate change is a powerful driver today, and how different it is to manage climate change and the challenge of climate change, with negotiation of climate change, with climate change happening. It's absolutely different to what's happened in the last century when we negotiated the convention and the climate regime. We expect, we hope that climate change will happen at the end of this century, and it's not true. It's happening. So the pressure, we have additional pressure, consider the negotiators, and also after almost 10 years of Paris Agreement, we need to understand how the international community, how the societies will understand better or not if we're able to provide solutions in action in short-term perspectives in such a way that short-term perspective could not undermine long-term perspective, to know how important it is to change things. So my first point here is that we need to recognize when we discuss climate change in the past, it was under the United Nations umbrella. Today, it's not only inside an FCCC, it's also outside an FCCC. And this is very important because we need to understand the dynamics, the political economic dynamics, absolutely different. When you go into G20, for example, that Brazil has the presence now, we know that in climate finance, how innovative Brazil is provoking the debate to connect with the finance track of G20, and more than this, to make sure that these recommendations that will emerge from the G20 could be used by your country, by your president, for the chair of the COP, and how we can accelerate solutions. This is very interesting, but also when you go outside, you don't have to discuss CBDR, for example. And how important for developing emerging economies, CBDR under the UNFCCC regime is critical important to make things happen. So this is two examples how complex the negotiations are today. And the big challenge that you have when you go into the agenda of COP29, and you need to understand the role of finance. And the new green wishing money, like plus $100 billion, that's something that's absolutely crazy, okay? So the importance of climate finance, and I'm not sure if it's developed finance, if the future can bring things together, and how indeed the leadership of your country will come to make sure that we will be able to come to the 10 years of Paris Agreement with really new conditions, political conditions to propose new ambitions considering the next 10 years. You know that you have 1.5 Celsius degrees this year. We achieved this. We exposed to this. And so we need to be pragmatic and optimistic, I think so. So, of course, that the importance of 1.5 Celsius as a political target is true, but the reality is not this. We are facing this today, and probably, if we have some specialists who have discussing this, that the ambition is around 3 Celsius degrees, 6.5 Celsius degrees. If you come into the big picture, and how we should manage things to make sure that you can go into the transition the next 10 years and be able to act and be able to finance and be able to promote adaptation and also to solve the problems like loss and damage, etc., etc. Everything is connected, and this means that we need to understand the role of climate finance. It's not only consider multilateral systems, it's also not only public funds or public money, and also the challenge of a new global arrangement. You go into multilateral development banks, we have the IMF, we have this diversity of debates, but indeed, people don't understand where is the money. And also, how when you have money, how complex it is, and Tulio knows a lot about this, to manage the arrangements, the institutional arrangements that the funds used to establish to access the money. Take time with this, and people are so upset. You know this. But also, the other way also to understand this is that when you go into the geopolitical perspectives, we understand that climate is part of the new geopolitical game. And it's not only because of the pressure. You have the end of the yesterday's civilization, it's true. The end of the fossil fuels, the end of sovereignty, of the Western sovereignty, and also the end of the lifestyles that you used to have today. And you have the new flows, the emerging flows, the trade, the money, energy flows, population flows that will put additional pressure in the contest, in this international and national contest. We are vulnerable to climate change. And the climate geopolitics comes together with the global geopolitics that is redefining the axis of the political power in the world. And this is true. It's not only because of global North and global South, but because of Western and non-Western countries. And this is very interesting when you go into like-minded blocs like G20, but also when you go to BRICS Plus next year, that you have the debate about climate change on BRICS Plus today, okay? And you know this, I know this, but the world probably doesn't know about this. And how Brazil will have the president, will chair BRICS Plus next year, at the same time, so like-minded bloc, at the same time, will chair multilateral arrangement in COP30. We have two different paths that we need to have a balanced perspective to manage politically, economically, technologically. And you know that polarized world is not easy to manage. Okay, so the role of the countries that have capacities to provide solutions in short-term perspectives, for example, is absolutely strategic. And this is the case of Brazil. And I'm not discussing here the problem of deforestation. Deforestation is a non-economic carbon. And we need to tackle deforestation. This is our responsibility because this is crime. Okay, the majority of the emissions, they are illegal. So it's absolutely important that our responsibility, and the President Lula makes this very clear, that we want to tackle deforestation, to reduce deforestation, to end deforestation, but this is not part of the economic arrangements. Probably could be used as an issue to establish protectionism or green protectionism against Brazil, for example, in agriculture. It's not true, because when we establish this, it should not be true. We must be able to pay, not only for the cost, but this will become price if you can provide solutions for this. So you are able to export grains without deforestation, but international market are not able to pay for this. So what I'm saying is that the costs will be under the responsibility of the developing countries, that the developed countries also not able to pay for CBDR. This is so unfair. And this will provoke probably additional lack of trust when you go into the society. It's not only the civil society, the NGOs, the private sector that needs really good regulatory arrangements to add funds and to make sure that you can move from short-term perspective to long-term perspectives. How you go in international trade without the WTO, et cetera, with all the problems of multilateral system institutions and capacities to manage these issues. When you negotiate climate change in the past, you have all these institutions absolutely available to manage things. Today, unfortunately not. Okay, unfortunately not. And in my opinion, you need to redefine or understand better how the new multilateral system should emerge, consider the new context with a fragmented or fractured world. That is true. Absolutely true. And in my personal opinion, I don't know that we'll be able to fix this, Ambassador, in the next 20 years. Additionally, you cannot forget that we're facing wars and conflicts. So we are buying additional crises in the future. What's happened with Ukraine war and also the degradation of the soil in Ukraine means that you have this contaminated and probably will take more than 70, 100 years to be restored. This is the most important soil for food production in the world. And it's a consequence. How would you like to manage, how we manage this with the inflation of food, for example, and how we go into social inequalities. So two things to be observed when you go into this really complex world. This is a polycrisis, as we used to name now, and go beyond the nature crisis. But this means that we need to manage better climate politics and nature politics. It's not only the global geopolitics. And this also means that we need to understand how we need to use better the trade-offs in short-term perspectives to allocate funds to protect social service in the countries. Or to preserve this. Why this is important to increase social protection? Because probably we'll be able to increase income, Solange, and also to make things less vulnerable for the societies in short-term perspectives. This is the meaning when you go to when President Lula, for example, ask as a priority to tackle hunger, consider food security, and also climate change. And we need to understand how to connect the dots in such a way that the leadership of the chair of COP29 will come to the world, not only to come into the agenda, but politically to express how you like to convene the world to come together under his leadership, under your leadership, under the leadership of the country, of society. And why this is important? Because it's a new world that's coming. We need new players into the room. We need new adults in the room. And you have new ones today. So the arrangements that will emerge from this deglobalization process, because we need to understand this also, the nationalism is there after COVID, et cetera, and you have the challenge of technologies and how technology demands energy. And this is an important point here for a country like Brazil. Brazil used to be a country that internationally has pressure considering deforestation and also the emissions of land use considered agriculture. Deforestation is a legality. We need to tackle this. When you go into agriculture, we need to have really good metrics and accountability and methodologies that recognize not only the emissions, but how tropical agriculture plays as a thing. And you don't have this today internationally. So the lack of credibility is not only internationally, it's nationally. When you go to private sector, we go to the agricultural sector, the complexity to negotiate things is true. Because the guys, please, recognize what we are doing. This is one side. But another side, when you go to tropical agriculture, is also provide solution for energy security. Why? Because you have biomass or bioenergy. And this is the role of a country like Brazil that has an energy mix that everyone will hope to have this by 2050, but we need to understand what would you like to have plus 2050. X plus delta in 2050. Why? Because all the routes of decarbonization or even for transition demands energy. And Solange is here, the vice president of the most important energy company in Brazil, internationally, of course, internationally in Brazil. And we have been discussing a lot how climate change should be really so strategic to bring agriculture, producing solutions, consider energy security. So it's important to go into the transition in a country, in the developing countries, not only to access energy, but how we could use this better today, consider transition. You have some countries in the world that play, you know this better than I, saying, okay, we are mitigating emissions because we are replacing fossil fuels. But it's fossil fuels. It's like a fake mitigation, or it's transition. We can be more efficient in transition, and we can come into the future to discuss transformation. All of these challenges, they are very important to go into geopolitical game, global geopolitical game, because it means societies that are able to provide solutions in short-term perspectives and must be prepared for this, and society that unfortunately don't have solutions in short-term perspectives. And this is the majority of the world. That's full dependent of fossil fuels. In my opinion, how we'll manage transition away, consider the decision from Dubai, and how would you like to manage the next 10 years or 12 years or 20 years, because the world doesn't have solution short-term perspective. It's very important to come into consider the trade-offs, and not only because we want, but because we don't have alternatives. So mitigation with carbon sink is a solution when it goes in restoration, forest restoration, or degraded land restoration, and about offset and the credibility of offsetting forests, and about accountability. Again, you demand technologies, and technology demands energy. Energy is the key factor, not only for the developed countries, but for a country like Brazil that will demand additional energy in the future. So it's, for me, it's really something, the debates around you, around the presence of your country, when you go into climate change, you must understand what are the critical issues that must be discussed and prepared in such a way that you can have the next steps with really people around you, around your country, saying, okay, we are in the right directions, consider adaptation, and we are exposed to climate change, because the consequence of the climate change that we're exposed today, these are the outcomes for the past, from the past, is our fail. We fail in the past to reduce or to mitigate emissions as it should be. This is true. Let's recognize this. We are able to mitigate, but not necessarily to deal with the challenges that nature imposed to us. And that's why we're exposed today, what's happening today in Brazil, for example. So disruptive is the process that we expose today in this country. So it's very interesting that we can come and discuss the climate geopolitics. This is part of the global geopolitics. You have the de-risking at the same time, together with the deglobalization. You have like-minded arrangements. You have the countries coming away, the societies coming in different perspectives. This is my last point. When you go into the societies, please, and you go into the crisis of multilateral systems, you need to understand that the flows of data, okay, consider the societies and internet, and how we share information, and how we share our literature, etc., etc. You can check it. It's fascinating. The flows among societies of data and information is different of the flows that we have with the government. We have a new world coming. It's happening today. absolutely happening today. And I think that's very important when you go to your leadership. I know that the agenda is so complex. I'm an advisor of your chair, so I know what's happening. But it's important that to come and to have a positive words from your president to say, we understand where we are, and we want to move the piece in the right direction to come together with the rest of the world. And avoid polarization and avoid tragedy, because we need people together. The only way to make things happen and consider the transition is to convince the global society with migration, with conflicts, with wars, etc., that we need to move the piece together. If not, again, it's a waste of time. We'll be absolutely exposed, and unfortunately, I think the more vulnerable. So welcome to Brazil, welcome to CEBRI. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. And more than this, I think that now we have this debate, but I'd like to invite Emmanuel, because Maria is not here, okay, to share 5 minutes the perspectives of global civil society that I have been discussed with Laurence Tubiera. It's okay for you? 5 minutes? In French.
Thank you very much, Isabella, and thank you very much to CEBRI for always being a place where important discussions happen. And special thanks to our friend from Azerbaijan, because it's a long way from home, and you indeed have a very important challenge in front of you, in particular at a time when we don't know yet what's going to be the outcome of the US election, when we don't have the commissioners appointed in Europe. So hopefully all of that creates better condition for your COP, but I think we all appreciate the magnitude of the challenge. Just a few thoughts on the road from Baku to Belém. I think there are two things that connect Baku to Belém, possibly three if we're really good about it, but that rests upon our shoulder. The first is finance, obviously. That is the primary focus of your COP, and for very good reasons. The second is NDC, or nationally determined contributions, or rather the process that goes from intended contributions to firm contributions. So the process to go from a first draft that only includes top-line targets to an actual policy and investment plan. Those two things, by definition, connect Baku to Belém. The third one, but it depends on us in Azerbaijan and Brazil being good, is what Isabella referred to, which is how the outside of the UNFCCC gets into the negotiations, how the action by non-state actors, the business, the investors, but also all of the organized society gets into the deal. And that's extremely important. And I think this is where having Brazil partner with Azerbaijan to avoid that we're just going from one presidency to the next makes a very big difference, and where the newly established Troika format makes a big difference. Just a few very simple thoughts on each of those connectors in between Baku and Belém. On finance, I think there are possibly three big ideas being floated at the moment. One of them is more relevant to the COP in Belém, so I will not talk about it at length. It is the Tropical Forest Forever Fund. I think it's critically important, but since we have a friend from Azerbaijan, we'll keep that for another conversation. The other two are, on the one hand, country platforms, which I think is critically important. And the other one is the idea of finding new, predictable financial resources through international taxation, in particular in the context of this task force on the global solidarity levies that was announced a few months ago. Country platforms, I think, to be a bit provocative in this room, the way Isabella always encourages us to be, we've got to learn the lessons of mixed success and failure of the just energy transition partnerships. We've got experience now in South Africa, in Senegal, in Egypt, in Indonesia, in Vietnam. Frankly, not all of it is good. And I think one of the reasons why they're not so good as they should is because of a disconnect in between the host country priorities and the priorities from the international community. And we need to work better on that. It's a process, country platforms, that needs to be driven from the interest of the host countries. And then we need to become much better at international cooperation behind those objectives. I also think that in financial terms, we need to become much better at financing the just part of the transition as opposed to only the technology part of the transition. On taxation, since it's already been a big focus of the Brazilian G20, I think we need to continue the effort, quite frankly, and we need to make it work in a way that serves both climate and development. I mean, it needs to be for both, in the same way that the Global Alliance for Food Security needs to look at climate considerations. And I think, quite frankly, it was extremely courageous on the part of Azerbaijan to put on the table the idea of a tax on production. Extremely courageous, but also very much looking at the national interest from Azerbaijan and at ways to finance the transition. And a lot of it is happening also in some states in Brazil. But I think we need to continue that conversation on the road from Baku to Belém. Just very simple words on nationally determined contributions, because I hope everybody understands that they are the building block of the Paris Agreement. I mean, if we don't have that, we've got a fragmented international climate regime. So everybody needs to prioritize the preparation of nationally determined contributions. They're going to be different from one country to the other. And here too, to be a bit provocative, I think for a major fossil fuel exporting country, there is an article in the Paris Agreement that says that an economic diversification strategy is one way to present a mitigation strategy. And I would encourage large or small fossil fuel exporting countries to think that what they've got to do is put forward an economic diversification strategy that is in particular clear about the fiscal implication of going from one economic model to the other. For the rest of the conversation on NDC, I think it's going to be important to move from a discussion on targets and numbers to a discussion on policy and investment plan. And that's why we need a first draft. And then we need to get back to the drawing board and also build a bit of a sense of a collective effort behind NDC. I see every country at the moment preparing domestically its NDC as if the others were not doing it. And I think we need to inject a sense of collective purpose. And hopefully this is what your event in New York by the time of Climate Week is going to achieve. I promised I would finish with just a few words on action by non-state actors. I think this is where it makes a huge difference if Azerbaijan and Brazil discuss together about some of their joint priorities, as opposed to us going from one COP to the other and being completely disconnected in our priorities. And I can think of a few initiatives that are getting traction at the moment where such a partnership would make a difference. I'm thinking in particular of all of the initiative around green industrialization. I'm thinking of all of the discussion around biofuels. I'm thinking of all of the discussions around green hydrogen. And I'm thinking as well about the initiatives around fertilizers, which I am very happy are getting some traction at the moment. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Manuel. These were very pertinent comments on this roadmap that links Baku to Belém. Now we're moving on to our keynote speaker and special guest, Mr. Yalchin, to talk specifically about the upcoming negotiations at COP29 and what is the expected legacy for the climate agenda of this COP. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank CEBRI for inviting us to take part in this very interesting discussion. Thank you, Madam Teixeira, Tulio. It's nice to be in the same panel with you and to share our thoughts and perspectives on the upcoming COP29, its expectations from international community. And I'll share also some of my own observations so far about the whole process, how it contributes to addressing the climate change and how we can make it better. As it was rightly pointed out, in general, the COP process itself and the negotiations within the process is not, of course, free of politics, and it doesn't. We are by negotiating, we are not only trying to solve the problem for the whole humanity caused by the climate change, but we are also seeing how fragmented we are in our approach to the whole geopolitics. And the climate itself, our attitudes towards climate itself is very much fragmented, and it has found its manifestation with 17 negotiating groups being present in the whole climate negotiations. It means 17 different views on several issues, and also interests and concerns. And when it comes to COP29, since the main expectation from COP29 is to deliver on means of implementation and finance, it further aggravates the already difficult and challenging context within the climate negotiations. So climate and finance both are separately difficult topics to find a consensus on, but when they come together, it really becomes a nightmare. And now we started to experience this nightmare already since the beginning of this year as a COP29 team in Baku. When it comes to the question, and then I will reflect also on what Emmanuel has mentioned, Madame Teixeira as well. Isabel, sorry. So the expectations from COP29 is to deliver, first of all, on new collective quantified goal, on or so-called NCQG. So far in the previous COPs, we have discussed and agreed on very ambitious outcomes on energy transition, on the climate change. But what the world and mainly developing countries were lacking is the means of implementation available for them to implement those ambitions and to translate those commitments into actions. And Baku is now expected to deliver on NCQG, new collective quantified goal, which is expected to provide such means of implementation for those in need, mainly developing countries. Last time in 2009, 100 billion target was set for the developed countries to provide funding or support to the developing countries. Now, after 15 years, Baku is expected to set the new target, the quantified target in this regard. It's a very difficult task for the COP29 presidency, but it's not, the ownership is not only the host country. This is our collective effort, and it's a collective responsibility to come to a decision, to agree on the decisions. We provide the avenue and platform as a host country, but at the end of the day, this is a party-driven process, and the parties should come to a conclusion on this decision. If there are there challenges? Yes, there are different elements or components of potential NCQG decision, and on each of these elements there are different views, and some of them can be discussed and negotiated, agreed at the level of negotiators, but some of them need really the highest level of political engagement, like the quantum, the number that we are going to agree, the new 100 billion, let's say, and also the contributor base, which is subject to also discussion, and some of the parties are raising whether the same contributors should continue to be the contributors or others should be added. But we have a Paris Agreement at the end of the day. The legal framework is there. It's clear in terms of answering certain questions in this regard. But on the second expected deliverable outcome from Baku is Article 6, operationalization of the Article 6 of Paris Agreement on carbon markets. This is a long-standing unresolved issue in the negotiation process coming from Glasgow. and has not been resolved yet, and Baku is expected to deliver on this as well. So, and we see some optimist approach and observations so far among the delegations on this topic, and we will provide additional also platforms for the parties to engage during this intersessional period from Bonn to Baku at the COP29. Many developing countries are expecting Article 6 to be operationalized because it could be a potential source of funding for them to in the energy transition goals. But on the other hand, out of negotiation processes, Azerbaijan also is expected to have some long-lasting legacies out of COP29. Like on transparency, we are at the beginning of the year, we have set the transparency or the submission of biannual transparency reports as one of our non-negotiation priority topic. And since the very beginning of the year, we have reached out to the parties, encouraging them to submit their BTRs and organize some workshops. What we have identified at the beginning that many parties are reluctant to submit their BTRs because of two reasons. One, they need a capacity to be built because the preparing BTR is a very technical and very difficult process. It's several hundreds of pages of document with full of data, matrices, and some developing countries really need capacity to be built for preparing this. But the second problem is of political nature. Like some countries, especially the developing ones, they are reluctant in submitting their reports because they think that once they submit their reports, if the quality would not be good, they will be subject to finger pointing, naming and shaming by developed countries. Like, you have done this not in an appropriate way, you should have done this in this way. And that is really discouraging these countries to submit their BTRs. And that is why in May in Baku, we organized a workshop bringing together developed and developing countries, asking the developed countries to assure the developing countries that it's not going to be used as a political tool against them. And this is a learning by doing exercise. We need to start from somewhere, and then on the way we can build further upon. And that was actually, this mission was completed. I mean, we achieved this result. This assurance was given by the developed countries. And the software that had to be ready for submission of the BTRs was just inaugurated at late June this year by the Secretariat, and now the developing countries started to submit their BTRs. Already 3 countries have submitted, but we are encouraging others by organizing some additional workshops, trainings to prepare and submit their reports as well. So transparency, and quite recently, a day before yesterday in Baku, we had a global workshop to launch Baku Transparency Platform, the BTP, which will be one of the legacies of the Baku COP. The BTP will be a platform even after COP29 for developing countries to build their capacity in preparing their BTRs, not only for this time, but also in the next stages as well. So additional legacies that we think could be out of Baku is we have recently introduced our 14 initiatives. One of them was, as Emmanuel mentioned, the Climate Finance Action Fund, and I will talk about it in the next panel more, but we had also several other initiatives on agriculture, on human capital development, on water, and one of them is very important also from the global geopolitics perspective, which is COP truce. Originally, there was an idea before to have an Olympic truce. Before the Olympic Games, UN General Assembly adopted resolutions on Olympic truce, and during the Olympic Games, the idea was to have this global ceasefire being observed during the Olympic Games in order for all international community to concentrate on sport as a means of solidarity. And now we have introduced, first time in the COP process, to have a COP truce during the COP period. And this is not only to promote the global peace agenda, but also to contribute to the emission reduction targets. Because military activities constitute 5 to 6% of the global emission. Only conflict in and around Ukraine cause around 150 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. And this is equal to Belgium's annual, for example, emission, just to compare. So therefore, having this COP truce being observed by the countries will definitely contribute to the global emission targets and mitigation. It will fill the mitigation gaps. And finally, on another legacy that we think could be coming out of Baku, which is related to the city of Rio, by the way, is to build the synergy among 3 Rio conventions. So, as you know, 3 conventions have been agreed in Rio. One is climate change, another on desertification, and one on biodiversity. And Azerbaijan will introduce very soon an idea which has a very fancy name by the way, Rio Trio. So bringing together 3 COP presidencies, Azerbaijan, Saudi Arabia, and Colombia, the incumbent presidencies, to have an institutionalized framework for cooperation among the 3 COP presidencies. It will be a moving kind of mechanism, like Azerbaijan will hand over to Brazil, and Saudi Arabia and Colombia will hand over this to the next presidencies. And this Rio Trio mechanism will be an asset for all of us to build the synergy among the implementation of these 3 conventions. And finally, Emmanuel mentioned about joint initiatives of Azerbaijan and Brazil as COP29 and COP30 presidencies. Yes, this is something that we are currently working on to ensure. Troika was one of the mechanisms to ensure the continuity of the progress coming from COP28 to COP29 and COP30, but we have a clear mandate on NDC on Troika. But we, together with Brazil, will, in these days, hopefully will sign a program of cooperation or partnership between Azerbaijan and Brazil called B2B, Baku to Belém, which will be filled up by certain concrete activities across several sectors and pillars of the Paris Agreement to build our synergy among ourselves, to synergize our priorities as COP29 and COP30 presidencies, and also to make sure that whatever we are going to achieve will be maintained in the next COPs as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elchin. It's very good to hear about this promising agenda, and we hope that this ambition is fulfilled. I will now pass the floor to Túlio, and he will comment on the potential scenarios of outcomes from COP29 and how this will influence the negotiations and perspectives for COP30 next year. Thank you very much, Túlio.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And it's a huge pleasure to be here at CEBRI, especially with Isabella, who has been tremendously a teacher since the very beginning of my career as a diplomat. As environment minister, and then many of the initiatives actually that we are fostering in G20 started back then, from bioeconomy to green bonds 10 years ago, and now Isabella here at CEBRI provoking us to always exercise leadership in a very creative way, because the issues that we have beforehand really are very new and really require new solutions and new mindsets. Obviously also Ambassador Yalchin, who I already consider a friend. It's very humbling to see that the Azerbaijani presidency of COP29 assumed this leadership role with a tremendous learning curve that is now teaching us how to do things. So we are learning a lot. And then building on what we expect COP29 to be. I believe that the most important thing is actually to contextualize what it means, COP29, with a view to COP30 in terms of three main perspectives. The first one is the scientific perspective. The second one is the policy-making perspective and what it means to the Paris Agreement. And the third one is the perspective, the systemic perspective of the global response to climate change when we have an impulse with COP29 to move the regime finally from a negotiating mode, which was actually what has defined the climate regime since its very inception, to an implementation mode when, as Isabella has said, we are no longer talking about climate change in the abstract. Climate change is not going to influence us. It's going to define the way our societies are going to offer prosperity to its people. It's going to define the ways in which our economy are going to prosper or not. It's going to define the way our countries will be positioned in the international arena. And it's very important actually to build on the points that were made by Isabella to finally understand that for countries like Brazil and Azerbaijan, we have to be very clear understanding that there is no leadership in the 21st century without a very strong climate leadership. Climate change will define expectations by societies, will define expectations by business, will define expectations by thinkers, will define expectations by voters and politicians as well. So when we come to this threefold contextualization, the scientific, the policy making, and moving from the negotiation and implementation phase, what connects COP29 to COP30 is how the path that actually began last year with the COP28, passing by COP29 to culminate at COP30, coincides precisely with the very narrow window of opportunity that the IPCC has alerted us to, that we have as the last chance for humanity to act to keep the 1.5 alive. Not only the 1.5, but if we are to also keep the 2 degree alive, this path from COP28 to COP30 has to be consequential. If we don't set the stage now from COP28, COP29, COP30, we will fail even in relation to the 2 degree. So that is very clear. That's a scientific fact. In terms of policy making, this cycle, COP28, COP29, COP30, defines the very first test of whether the Paris Agreement works as an international policy-making instrument. An international policy-making instrument that started being fully operational. And what does that mean? There are 3 main areas that the Paris Agreement will be tested as a policy-making instrument. The first one is the NDC cycle, which Emmanuel has mentioned. The NDC cycle from the Paris Agreement is one in which countries will present and communicate nationally determined contributions periodically, and between one and the other, we will gather together, we will gather as an international community to assess and take stock of our efforts, where we were, where we are, where we want to be. And based on that, this global stocktake is supposed to inform, on the one hand, international cooperation, and on the other, the next cycle or the next round of NDCs. So this is the cycle of NDCs. And we have to recognize that last year, the Emirati presidency of COP28 was indeed very successful in achieving a very significant global stocktake. We did do the job in looking backwards and seeing where we were. We did the job in looking right now where the gaps are, and we did do the job of where we want to be, including in terms of the global targets that we set to ourselves around the energy transition, but also deforestation. Based on the global stocktake, now we have all the information we need, both to guide the international cooperation and to guide all of us countries in presenting our next round of NDCs next year, when Brazil will be hosting COP30. So, and at COP29, what is very different from the previous round or the first round of NDCs is that the first round of NDCs was based on the 100 billion goal. A 100 billion goal that was firstly adopted formally in 2010 based on a commitment by developed countries in 2009. But that 100 billion is related to a shared vision to limiting global warming to 2 degrees, not the 1.5. That's very important. What changed? Below. Below, well below. That's, yes. Exactly. But what changed is that now the IPCC already in 2021 alerted us that climate change was much faster and its impacts was going to be much more serious than we thought in the previous cycle of the IPCC, the previous assessment report that was adopted in 2014 that guided the adoption of the Paris Agreement in 2015. Now science is telling us that the situation is much more dire. And what is even more critical in 2024 is that we don't need science to tell us anymore. Like what Isabella said, we are feeling climate change. And we have, for the first time, the chair of the IPCC this year, in the beginning of this year, recognizing that climate change is much faster than ever anticipated by science. And he recognized that we are now in uncharted waters. It means that climate change is out of control. How consequential COP29 is that we need the new collective goal on climate finance to restore the faith that humanity is not only willing to work together against the challenge, but also that countries that are willing to show ambition will have the finance to support its ambition. So Emmanuel presented the difference between intended nationally determined contribution and nationally determined contribution. Intended nationally determined contributions are very much related to ambition, what we want, what we strive to do. But this ambition needs to be very much grounded in very sound policies that need finance, needs means of implementation to get out of paper. And the reality check that we all are faced now in 2024, when climate change is upon us, is that the pen is not going to work alone. We need to act so that the atmosphere will feel. It's not political strategies that will take us out of the climate conundrum, but actually effective action. So the most consequential aspect of COP29 for COP30 will be the ability of the NCQG to inspire ambition so that at COP30 we have a set of NDCs that together will restore the faith and the trust of society, business, industry, and governments that we are serious about climate change, that the transition will happen, and that we will be preparing our societies to the effects that are already upon us. It's about a cost correction, but it's also about a cost correction inside the negotiating process, because the 100 billion was not fulfilled. We need a new collective quantified goal that will restore this trust between developed and developing countries, but also a new goal that will inspire trust by policymakers, not politicians, not diplomats, that if they adopt a very ambitious target, they will have the support from the international community. So that's the one aspect of the NDC cycle. Ambassador Yao-Ching also mentioned the BTRs, the Biennial Transparency Report. That's already another leg of the test of the Paris Agreement as an international policy-making instrument, because the BTRs are going to present us with information from all countries where they are individually. If the GST, the global stock take, on the one hand, presented the stock take in a collective manner, the BTRs are going to present this stock take in an individual manner. And it will be fundamental, because in a moment of truth, as we are now, we need these reality checks, including inside our own countries. What are the gaps? How can we provide assurances that investment needs in terms of enabling environments? But what do we need and what do we want to ask the international community in terms of support, finance, technology, and capacity building? All this information are going to be in the BTRs. So this is extremely important. And finally, we are also going to have many other work streams in the regime. The Article 6, as Ambassador Yao-Ching mentioned, if we close it in Baku, it means that the Paris rule book is completed. This is not little. Exactly. We also have the global goal on adaptation. We need fundamental advance in the global goal of adaptation, on which legal mandate is going to culminate in Belém on the indicators. The mitigation work program, what is going to happen with the mitigation work program? And then the just transition work program, not to mention the external agenda, but I also wanted to touch upon two issues that are rarely mentioned. One is we have a goal, a long-term goal of the the Paris Agreement to align financial flows to low carbon and climate resilient societies. This is extremely important. It's very much related to the work that the Brazilian presidency of G20 has been fostering. It does not coincide with what we want to do in the NCQG. And now that the NCQG is going to be finished, are we going to be able, as a regime, to regulate the 2C, to give the signals not for international cooperation, but for the capitalist system? That's a very important point that we will be depending upon COP29. And finally, a new mechanism of technology, the technology implementation mechanism that was launched by the GST. Depending on how things advance at COP29, we are going also to have major inflections in the field of technology, especially related to some of the elements that Isabella has mentioned, that the world is changing. Now, data is also important. Technology is also important. AI is extremely important, especially if we are going to achieve, to give scale and speed to the results that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Túlio.
I'm not sure if I go to Baku. So complex. But probably have a good party at the end, no? Have party, let's dance and sing.
Enjoy it.
I enjoy it. Just one comment before we go to the second session. Thank you very much, Túlio, for your comments and how robust comments you have here. And but still, and also Ambassador, still, I think that we need to, after Baku and between Baku and Belém, we need to figure out better how trust is. And I like to make the idea of the truth. Okay, this is very nice, and because this means hope. Also, it's a fresh air when going to these countries that and around the world they're so worried about things. But I think that we are looking forward to address credibility and also trust. And trust, I understand when you go into NDCs and come that countries want to be ambition, how international community will support them, but how the societies that will be exposed to climate crisis, and this means how to bring mitigation, adaptation, resilience together, and will be essential to restore trust, because it's not only the countries or the governments, but indeed how people that are vulnerable will understand these movements that will emerge from Baku to Belém. This means developing world. This means plus G20. We cannot forget that at the end of that year, we will end a 5-year cycle of the presidents of G20 under the developing countries or global south. And we need a balance, okay, to understand better our performance and the political role that we want to assume, consider this new momentum of the world, this transition, the geopolitical transition of the world. So my feeling is that it will be very important, as you mentioned, to understand the international community and the the society, the private sector is part of this, and also science as a political player. We are not more discussing 1.5 to Celsius degrees. You know the realities and you know the scenarios and the foresights, but indeed, how we go into the national realities, regional realities, to make sure that we can have scientific information, okay, to manage better the decision process, and to understand the meaning of ambition when we have to ground things and to make sure that international at the global level, the negotiation makes sense or not. I think that we have really a huge problem when we go into trust. Credibility thing is easier. It's complex, but it's easier. But trust, restore trust in a fragmented and a fractured international community, international system. But I think that if we're able to join our voices, and I like also how we use means of implementation in innovative way, it's innovative, it's a political innovative way to approach means of implementation, and it's not finance or capacity building. I think that the critical issue will be technologies. How we'll be able to be creative enough to share, to allow to share technologies that are available, and how we could use this better. Again, artificial intelligence is so disruptive, but we're going to food security, energy security, etc. In short-term perspectives, we need to use this better than we're doing today. And I hope that you guys, under responsibility, I'm out of the game, and civil society today is so nice. I'm former minister, but I'm a advisor, okay? So my feeling is that it would be very important to know, after the 5-year cycle of emerging economies and developing economies under the leadership of G20, plus the cycle of COPs on climate change, and also biodiversity, but this is another issue. I agree that we're looking forward to bring the Rio Trio. It's like singers together, very nice. I hope so. Let's see. But what I think that is very important to observe, it's after this cycle, okay, by 2025, 10 years of Paris Agreement, how the emerging economies and developing countries will jump into this agenda. Okay, and this is the answer that you need to be addressed from Baku to Belém. It's our responsibility. Back to you. Have the next session. I think that you'll be back. You need to sing now. Okay. But Teresa, you have the floor. Sorry.
Thank you, Isabella. Very good wrap up of the discussion earlier. We have a second moment of our discussion now. So Tulio, I'd like to thank you and invite you to take your chair and take a seat in the audience. And I'd like to invite up Ambassador Lilium Chagas and Hugo Mendes. As they take their places, I will quickly introduce them. Hugo Mendes holds a master's degree in sustainable development, bachelor's degree in forest engineering. He's an environmental analyst at the Ministry of the Environment and has held positions of chief of staff, general coordinator, and technical advisor in different secretariats. His professional experience is focused on the climate change agenda and on activities carried out within the framework of the United Nations Convention for Climate Change. Ambassador Lilium Chagas is director of the Climate Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She leads the team of Brazilian negotiators in multilateral negotiations on climate change. As a career diplomat, she served in Brazil's missions in Brussels and Montevideo and in the embassies in London, Rabat, and Mexico City. She has experience in regional and multilateral trade negotiations, promoting Brazilian exports and investments abroad, public policies on sustainable development, and combating climate change. Welcome to the panel. This next discussion is going to be a little bit more focused on energy transitions. So we are back to our keynote speaker, Ambassador Yalchin, who will talk about the most pressing issues during the upcoming negotiations at COP29 in terms of the challenges, and specifically about the role of Azerbaijan's oil and gas sector in the contents of the fossil fuel phase-out negotiations, including the oil financing fund launched by Azerbaijan. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for this setting the scene for this panel. In fact, there are a lot of course, challenges to the climate negotiations, and COP29 negotiations, as I explained earlier, would be even further challenging this year. In addition to those challenges that I've already explained, and as Emmanuel also put it in the previous conversation, the elections around the world could be an additional hurdle in the process. More than 60 countries, around 4 billion people are going for a vote this year. Some of them already voted. In the European Union, we have seen some change already in the European Parliament. In the UK, the government, the party in the power has changed. We have seen also some other changes in different countries. And one of the most decisive elections in this regard is coming up in early November in the US. In general, are we feeling already the impact of this outcome of these elections into the negotiation process? So far, no. I would say that already, despite the fact that these changes have happened, but the negotiators have not made us feel these changes in their approaches. That's something that is promising for the COP29 negotiations coming up. As for the elections in the US, we hope that regardless of the outcome of the elections, it's not going to change the course of action within the negotiation process, since we are talking about an issue which is related to the whole humanity, which is affecting every individual around the world, and it should not be dependent on the political landscape in any particular country or countries. So therefore, main challenges within the negotiation process is not only coming from the particular positions of certain countries on certain topics, but also the external factors impacting on the course of negotiations. When it comes to Azerbaijan's own climate agenda, I think hosting COP29, the decision made for us to host the COP, also impacted positively on the agenda within Azerbaijan as well. that we have started to accelerate all those transformational changes in the economy, in our approach to the climate, and this is quite already visibly seen. The state-owned company of Azerbaijan is our biggest oil and gas energy company, and it already announced its 2050 net zero target. And this is, for us, a really big step towards transitioning away from fossil fuel. The second biggest step since the very beginning of this year was us joining the methane pledge. Joining the methane pledge really requires a state to get on itself a really courageous obligations or commitments, which need significant investment. And here, balancing the economic growth with environmental sustainability is very important, especially those countries having fossil fuel industry being the main source of funding for the development-related projects. And for the country coming out of the conflict, a decades-long conflict, and trying to restore the territories, its destroyed territories, it's very difficult task to also invest in the climate or energy transition-related projects. But the commitment is there, political willingness is coming from the top, that Azerbaijan wants to transition away from fossil fuel, also to transform to a low-carbon economy. And this needs a big investment. 22% of Azerbaijan's land last year suffered from severe drought, which caused by water scarcity. This is one of the biggest climate problems in Azerbaijan, and we are trying to solve this matter. And also there is an ambitious target for Azerbaijan, having the emissions reduced by 40% by 2050, which we are now working on long-term strategy, and a new, more ambitious NDC to be submitted to by the deadline in order to have to announce our more ambitious plans for the future. So all this once again testifies to the fact that being a host of the COP is not something to be, for the fossil fuel country to be ashamed of or to be criticized, but rather to be appreciated for its courage to have all these transformational changes to be announced or planned. I frequently receive questions from international journalists or the events that I have attended from some people from the audience, why Azerbaijan as a host, yet another fossil fuel country wanted to host COP, why should you host the COP? And the answer to this question is very simple. I mean, it's not as simply a so-called greenwashing attempt, but rather a brave attempt or step towards a greener future, because as a host country, we are now under even more scrutiny by the international community, whether we are transforming our economy, whether we are transitioning away from fossil fuel, whether we are doing really sufficiently to show to the world that we are in this transformational phase. And the most important is not where you are earning this money from, but where do you spend the money you are earning from the field. If you put it in, if you are investing it in green energy or renewable energy, if you are investing it in the human development, why you should be ashamed of that? This is the question. And also Azerbaijan decided to have at least 30% of renewables in its energy mix by 2030. This is also something that we have announced very recently, and because of the COP, all these processes are being accelerated. And finally, on the Climate Finance Action Fund that we have recently announced among our 14 initiatives, it's worth to mention that there are a lot of funds available for the developing countries, climate-related funds. But the problem that we have identified in our engagement with many of the parties is not about having the funds, sufficient funds available or not. But the question is are they accessible? In our conversation, mainly with the small island developing states, what we heard from them was, for example, in Caribbean region, a disaster happened. They applied for a climate fund to GCF or JEF to provide funding for them, or World Bank, for recovery. And they say that we get the response after 2 years when we don't need it, need this funding. So the problem is not about the availability of the fund, but the accessibility of it. That is why that was one of the main reasons that we wanted to design a fund that is accessible in these cases, in case of natural disasters, to be immediately available for the countries in need. But the most important innovation that we have brought with this funding is a source of funding, which is the fossil fuel countries. And not only the states as potential contributors, but also the private sector, the businesses. So the new fund is going to be a public-private fund. The source will be from fossil fuel industry. The beneficiaries will be developing countries, not only SIDS and LDC, but all developing countries. And it's going to be a kind of blended, operating on a blended basis, like not only to be an investment fund or investment guarantee fund, but at the same time there will be a rapid response facility mechanism within it, having 20% of the revenues coming from the investments to be allocated for rapid response measures for the countries suffering from natural disasters. So far, still the concept is being developed to be ready very soon and to make it available for potential contributors already starting considering to join or not. But the idea itself has been welcomed by international community in a way that fossil industry not posing itself as polluters, but vice versa. As a responsible community of countries, understanding that we should be at the forefront of the whole process by having some revenues coming from this sector to invest it in a good way in the developing countries to help them to transition, to fund their transition, but at the same time to build resilience against the climate change. So we hope that the potential contributors, by the way, in our engagement so far with potential contributors, we have seen only positive attitude towards the initiative, but we'll see how it's going to progress till the end. Thank you.
To Hugo Mendes, who will continue this conversation about how to balance fiscal responsibility and environmental ambition in oil-producing countries.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here, for having the possibility of being here representing the Ministry of the Environment. I'll be speaking on behalf of Anatoni. She would love to be here, but unfortunately she had other agendas and she asked me to participate in this debate. Well, and I'd like to thank you for the question. You could have something more controversial, to have someone from the Ministry of Environment to be talking about the energy sector. It won't only be Ministry of the Environment talking about the agriculture sector in Brazil, but we'll have this for the next opportunity. So we're talking about one of maybe the biggest and the powerful global markets in the world. So it's a very complex issue. And we're also dealing with the sector, one of the sectors, considering IPCC sectors, that is really incremental in terms of emission and what drives emission inside the energy sector. It is usually influenced by the population, the growth of the population, and also the PB, the product, internal product. And so all the technologies that are to be applied inside this sector to able to make this transition possible, they have the difficulty that they do not deliver fast results. So the energy sector, when we talk about the energy sector, we can analyze this in 3 different dimensions. We have a global dimension to discuss it. We have a national dimension inside Brazil. And we also should have the perspective of a regional dimension when we consider the Amazon. The global dimension, it took us 28 editions of COPs to have a decision, which was the global stocktake decision last year, to talk about the sector, the energy sector, which is the paragraph 28. But the paragraph 28 presented us with some goals, some qualitative, some quantitative, but it did not present us the way forward. It did not present us with an implementation plan. And all that we are talking about is that we need to move from pledges to the implementation plan. And what we have as a guiding principle for this global dimension is that developed countries must move first. And this is due to the fact that considering the principle of historical responsibilities, the climate change that we are dealing right now, it is connected with emissions that happened 100 years ago. So there is a specific and very strong connection that tell us why they need to move first. When we're dealing on the national Brazil's experience, Brazil is also a huge consumer and huge producer of oil, and we have the responsibility inside Brazil to coordinate our climate plan, which is something that we are doing right now, together with more than 25 ministers involved nowadays, and we have established 2 strategies, one for mitigation and one for adaptation. And inside each one of those strategies, we are preparing in a coordinated manner with the civil house and the sectorial ministers, those what we call the sectorial plans. And the energy inside the mitigation strategy, we have 9 sectorial plans. And on the adaptation strategy, we will have 16 sectorial plans. And energy is an issue that will be considered. We have individual plan, sectorial plan for this issue inside each one of these strategies. And this is important because this will be one of the instruments that we will have to deal with how we're going to treat this issue inside the government. We have the SIM, which is the Interministerial Committee for Climate Change, which is one space for debate. And we also have the National Council for Policy Energy, in which those debates for those controversial aspects, I mean, all the transitioning away from fossil fuels, how we are going to promote this, they are going to be discussed on a high level of the government structure. But we still don't have right now a open space, a technical space inside the government to really discuss on how this transition is going to be addressed. We have some initiatives. For example, we see some public audiences inside the Congress that promotes this dialogue, but it's not well consolidated yet. So we understand that we need to open space for the debate. Okay, and this is absolutely true and more critical when we're dealing with the regional controversial that we are living right now, which is on the Amazon basin, because we do not have any kind of forum, regional forum, where we have this conversation, this dialogue happening. So I would love to hear what are the Amazonians, they think about this issue. Okay. And And this is particularly important because the way we see it is that we have like one, the oil sector, they are, as I said before, the biggest and powerful sector. And we do not have the renewables sector being as strong as it would be, because even though we are increasing the production of renewables, China is a great example of this, they are not as strong as the oil and production sector. So, but we do not want to have any kind of transition that be chaotic. It must be, as we agreed on the global stock take, orderly, on an orderly manner, and just an equitable transition that will guide us to this transitioning away from fossil fuels.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you for being brave enough to take on this question. I know it's not an easy question to ask someone involved in environmental policy, but these are the challenges that we have to face as a country and Azerbaijan, and it's a matter very relevant to the current COP Troika, right? So now we're moving on to Ambassador Lilium Chagas, our last speaker today, and she will talk about the success indicators for COP30. And if the NDCs should have a qualitative approach also alongside a quantitative approach. Please, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, for being here. I'm really happy to be at CEBRI because I'd like to recognize the importance of CEBRI by proposing and organizing online debates on Brazilian foreign policy during the COVID pandemic, when Brazilian foreign policy was going through a very special moment. So I was living in Mexico City. I wouldn't miss those sections, special to hear Ambassador Marcos Azambuja. No, and but independently, it was really important to have this space on foreign policy during a very particular moment of our recent history. So I would like to recognize that. Well, I feel that everything has been said. Hugo, you said you would speak less than Tulio, but you spoke a lot, so I will be very brief because the previous talks cover everything. Also, Emmanuel gave us ideas to our bilateral partnership, Baku Belém. Thank you. And I just would like to highlight two aspects that I think were not mentioned to add to the debate. First, what to expect for COP30? I think that Tulio covered that. But I would like to add that it will be a very special moment in our negotiations, because 2025 will be the year of Paris plus 10. 10 years after the adoption of the Paris Agreement, but also will be the year of Rio plus 33. So it will be an opportunity and a space to rethink, reframe everything that has been reframed, the negotiation process that is very polarized and very slow to respond to reality. And also maybe to remember and reestablish some of the founding principles of sustainable development that were coming from the Rio conference, that these kind of problems, kind of challenges, they must be tackled together in efforts of international cooperation, of common understanding of the challenges, and collectively defining the best way to deal with them. We have lost that in these 3 decades. So maybe COP30 will be a moment of truth to the climate multilateralism, and also to the trust and credibility and friendship, more common understanding among the almost 200 parties of this process. Regarding the mandated negotiations, the official negotiations, I think they were already touched upon. We'll have some assured results, hopefully, on Just Transition Work Program, on the indicators for adaptations, very important at this time when climate change is hitting the ground, and also some features, some discussions on how to implement the Article 2(1)(c) of the Paris Agreement, which is very generic. All financial flows must be aligned with low carbon development. So this would be for the official negotiations. For the action agenda, how we call these parallel negotiations, this parallel world that aims to engage business, big tech, corporations, civil society, universities. That really became a feature, of the process. In the beginning was not like that, but now it is. It is very important because these decisions, these guidelines, they must be implemented by real companies. So they must be there. They must be part of the definition of the rules and of the implementation of what has been decided. So in this realm, really the sky is the limit. And we'll have to see how we'll go in Baku. That is very, it's coming strong also in their 14 initiatives. And then we'll have time to see what we need to be doing in 1 year and a half in this area as well, and propose some bold, important initiatives to be launched there. Ambassador Lago mentioned this morning, we'll have new financial mechanisms for forests, a massive reforestation plan, because it's what science also is recommending. But we still have some room to see what will be needed in this area also. Regarding the NDCs, as you know, this process is very particular now, because the guidelines, they are decided collectively, but in the end of the day, it's up to each country to implement. Now, so that's in the name of the climate policy, NDC, National Determined Contributions. So it's also mentioned as being a bottom-up process. Now, we decide where we want to go, when we need to go collectively, but it's up to each one of the parties to decide how to do it, in which scope, and how to implement it. So the agreed rules on NDCs, they are very broad. There is an obligation to present the NDCs in a 5-year cycle. They must be progressive in ambition. One must be more ambitious than the last one. And they should have information to bring clarity to what extent that policies, that contributions, they must be understood. That they have to be explained, so everybody will be able to access the NDC. Only last year in COP28. The first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement went a lot further, and recommends countries to have NDCs that are economy-wide and cover all greenhouse gases in all sectors. But again, it's a call. It's a call. We'll have to see how each country will take up this call. And this is the new element that I would like to, because nobody touched upon. there has been some questioning now of what does it mean? Is an obligation to include these features, these characteristics, or NDC, or is just a call or recommendation? Each one will take as one wishes. Some countries mentions as this is a list, it's a menu of characteristics that each one can choose. And others say no, it's clearly that is a direction that everybody should respect and go this way. So in this moment, it's very important that the political mandate that the Troika of Presidents was given, and is working on it. You know, a series of activities, of events to give political momentum to this NDC designing moment that we are living right now. So NDCs must come strong. They must include what they must be informed by what the GST brought, and this will help us to arrive in the COP30 with a synthesis report, or with a synthesis evaluation, a common evaluation of these individual climate policies, hopefully that are bold enough to be aligned with 1.5. So I think I will stop here, not to extend our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think your comments were very, very pertinent and definitely added to what has been said before. We are over time, but Isabella will comments to wrap up, and then everyone is invited for the coffee break, and we can continue the conversation informally.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that you have here in this afternoon some good inputs and also perspectives. I do believe that this bilateral cooperation between Baku and Belém is fresh air, considering international negotiations. But I would like to highlight two things here, and to understand when you go into this global society, national society, how we manage the contradictions that you have in the considered international negotiations. And this means how, Emmanuel, we will celebrate 10 years of Paris Agreement. Okay, we need to understand that Paris Agreement is the only tool, considering the climate regime, that we have today to bring countries and society together. I don't believe that we'll be able, in short-term perspectives, to adopt something new, considering the fracture of international system and also the complexity to manage internationally today the transition on climate change. Okay, everyone today, I think that the majority of the world absolutely understands the importance and the priority of the climate crisis, but also understand, or should understand, or must understand that we need to manage the crisis in the present, because this is happening. And it's not only consider, and probably we will have to manage our ambition, Ambassador Lilian, and we need to do this, and we must do this, but to fix the future. Okay, and in the present, we need to know how to be resilient, how to promote adaptations, how to be less exposed to risks and vulnerabilities. This is not a contradiction. This is different that you have by 2092. And when you bring together sustainability as the big umbrella, and this you have desertification, biodiversity, and climate change, and forests, and declaration, not a convention, but a declaration. Okay. Now, my feeling, and I fully agree that we need to fight to understand how we can develop synergies with sustainability and climate change, but we need to recognize that we don't have the architectures to manage these innovative platforms. For example, you know this, that how to build this energy security architecture for the fuels of the future. We don't have this today. And we need to recognize that how we need to change things, considering the fossil fuels crisis that we faced more than 50 years ago. The global architecture that you developed to manage energy security in the past is not enough to manage the energy security today and in the future. This is what climate change crisis and nature crisis they are bringing to us in this momentum of the world, the political momentum and diplomatic momentum. We cannot forget that to go into the COPs, and this is a multilateral environment, that to have the climate diplomacy there in the negotiation process, but around this, you have other different COPs. You have the global society that today is not only outsiders that used to be in the past. You have private sector, you have another adults in the room. They are there. They're looking for to understand better what are the consequences of the negotiation and also what are the responsibilities to come together or not. And you have around this, you have the global society, the diversity of constituents that are looking for some of them trying to reform the political context of the COPs. Okay, to change the process. And this is sometimes tricky to manage the same things, all the things simultaneously. This will happen in Baku, but it's happening in Brazil. And it's very interesting when you go to discuss this and to make sure, Tulio, that you know that governance is about put people in the driver of the alignment of the actions and the knowledge to manage better the transition and transformations. We need to put people this. To bring people, put their considered in the driver, to make sure that we are the right direction. Even you can have some asymmetries when you go into ambition. As I mentioned, have some countries that are coming, developed countries, to say that to promote mitigation, but this is based on fossil fuels, replacing fossil fuel source. It's good, but not enough to change things. We're not fixing the future. Okay, this is the problem that the political problem that you have behind the scenes when you go to discuss the next 10 plus 10 plus 10 or 30 years by 2050. That's not real also. It's from 2050 to 2070. Okay, this is the this is the real world. I know that the negotiators has to manage the brackets. I'll be so polite here, okay? But we as society and private sector, all the players, we need to understand how complex things are today to support the negotiations. And I absolutely agree, all this, Ambassador, everything that you share, etc. You have an alliance to come together, etc. But we as society, we need to understand that our challenges to fix things will be so complex. The solution must be interconnected, and doesn't help that to have polarized political situation or some constituents like environmentalists versus 1, 2, 3. It's over. The game is over. The political power that will emerge from this agenda is new. Okay, and I hope that we can fight against the denialists. Okay, and also how in my country, in our region, how democracy is so exposed. And this will happen in Belém. So my feeling is that we need to understand our responsibilities as global society, civil society, private sector, business sector, financial sector. Not only the negotiators, but they are doing what they need to do. But to manage this better, we need to do more. This is my experience, my opinion, and I do hope that from Baku to Belém, we can come into the global society, not only to put pressure on, it's our role to do this, but make sense that at national level, subnational level, we need to understand how to convince people and figure out better arrangements to make sure that's not, the thing that you mentioned, really something very important, how to access funds, but at the cost of these funds. And you know how sometimes, how complex it is to access funds today in the world. The funds are there, the private sector there's there. We can have blended. But I now as a board member of BNDES, of National Development Bank in Brazil, how complex it is to manage the solutions and to be able to offer this in long-term perspectives. So it's important. In many of the countries that unfortunately the public budget will be not available to pay for the incentives or subsidies to preserve or to protect us to the vulnerability of climate change. So you need off-taker from capital market, etc. We need to come to the finance world to understand better what are the languages that people will understand that, okay, I'm exposed to a global crisis, but this is not a tragedy. And finally, to say, I understand, and I'm one of the used to put pressure on this during my life, that we need political rooms to debate, to dialogue, to restore credibility, even to figure out some solutions. But I was asked in a seminar here in CEBRI about the elephants in the room. The world that I'm facing today is that the elephants will be there and the rooms will be over. There is no more rooms, okay? And we must be prepared to understand what to go to the virtual world, and these are the political rooms that we have managed today. We need to manage this today. And this is very fascinating because at the end of the process, energy will be in the core of the debate, on the stage, on the screen. And if we're not able to understand how a country like Brazil, that has really a comfortable situation, but with some asymmetries in electric generation, regulatory governance or system in Brazil, it's we are not prepared for the future. It's not able to manage this now. It's really something that we need, come on, this is the solution that the Brazilians needs, and why? To allow other energy source, like from biomass, from biofuels, second generations, green hydrogen, to make sense not only for us, for national market, but for international markets. So my feelings is that we need to understand, even in a country that has this comfortable situation in energy mix, how you should discuss or must discuss energy transition in this country. If not, it's like to postpone things. And after this, I like to recommend to drink caipirinha now because this is a low carbon caipirinha, and this makes sense how you can bring agriculture together with energy. Thank you very much, Teresa. We'll close the section.
I'd just like to thank everyone because I'm not going to attempt to make closing remarks after Minister Isabella. So thank you everyone for your participation. I think this was very informative, and we have another important side event from Think 20 on Monday, which is with the Asian Development Bank Institute about climate finance, and there will be caipirinha afterwards. So I'd like to invite everyone to the side event on Monday at 4 p.m. Thank you.